Well, let's get started here. Welcome, everybody. Good evening. You are joining in another episode of For Life Live, an LFL Zoom event. And I'm your host, Reverend Jeff Duncan, the Director of Mission and Ministry at Lutherans for Life. So as I've been sharing earlier, I pray that your weather is well, but I also pray that you are well. And if not, that the Lord is blessing your period of recovery. And with that in mind, let us join together in prayer. Heavenly Father, grant your mercy and grace to your people, those who are suffering the pains of illness, and especially those drawing near to death. Comfort and guide them with your word of truth, the hope of eternal joy and a resurrection unto glory in the life of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. Grant us patience and strength to help them in their times of trial. And give us all a clear sense of our Christian vocation in care and concern for our neighbor, as well as witness to the world of your promise of love and salvation through the forgiveness of our sins delivered by grace through faith in the work of Jesus Christ alone. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Well, I want to take a few moments and introduce any guests that may be with us tonight. I'm looking at a list of some folks, and I don't know if some of them are on. I don't know if Reverend Michael Solomink, our Executive Director, is on tonight. Michael, are you out there? Michelle Bauman, our Director of Y for Life. Michelle, are you there? You want to greet?
Yeah, I'm here. It's very nice to be here. I am the Director of Y for Life, and I know we've met, I've met a few of you already on other For Life Live events. So it is nice to be here and wonderful to see so many people wanting to know about how to be gospel motivated voices for life. So thanks for joining us.
And make sure you tell a little bit about Chats for Life, please.
Sure, yeah. With Y for Life, we started Chats for Life, which is a youth version of basically what we are doing right here. We started back in April and met every Thursday night all the way through summer. So we have served over 60 youth, high school and college age. And since school has started, we are now doing it twice a month as well, just like For Life Live. So Chats for Life was kind of an opportunity to meet with young people. And if you have any young people in your congregations, or you're connected to schools, please share with them this opportunity. Last week, we talked about IVF, and we'll be talking about we'll be talking about the death penalty next week. So we try and talk about life issues that youth have expressed some great interest in. So yeah, and if you want more information about it, please feel free to email me. My email is just like everyone else at Lutheran for Life. The first letter is M, and then our last name, so mbauman@lutheransforlife.org. And I can put that in the chat.
That'd be great, Michelle. Thank you very much for sharing that. And I do encourage the groups out there that have youth, get them involved with Chats for Life. It's an excellent opportunity to discuss the same things that we're talking about at For Life Live on their level and with their participation. Barb Geisfeld, do you want to say hi and greet us from Regional Director of Texas?
Hi again. Yes, I'm a Minnesota girl that escaped a long time ago, and now we live in Texas, where I'm the Regional Director. My job is to visit churches, schools, groups, any kind of Lutheran gathering where I present, teach, encourage, to help them become better at being gospel motivated voices for life. I'm starting my 6th year, so it's a wonderful ministry. Anybody on this call that has any questions about what's happening in Texas, I'm your girl, B. Geistfeld at lutheransforlife.org.
Thank you, Barb.
Can I ask you a question, Barb?
Yes.
I have a daughter that's Prince of Peace in Carrollton, Plano, Texas, and their pastor's very pro-life, but they don't do anything with.
I'm having my presentation there on October 18.
Great. My granddaughter, she's one of their technicians there, so maybe you'll get to meet her. Her name is Madeline.
All right, yes, I'm doing Carol Stainer at Prince of Peace is an 84-year young person who has put this all together, and will be doing my live presentation at Prince of Peace In October, I gave them a set of fetal models at their school a couple years ago. So
Oh.
I'm very aware of Prince of Peace in Carrollton.
Thank you, Barb.
Great.
Appreciate
Okay,
it.
I'll talk to my daughter and granddaughter. Thank you. Bye.
All right. Well, in a moment, I'm going to introduce tonight's presenters, but first, let's cover a couple of the basic rules of common etiquette for our Zoom connection tonight. As always, I ask that you find the mute button on the lower left of your menu bar of the Zoom screen. And if you've not already done so, please go ahead and mute yourself now. A question might come up during the presentation. I'm going to ask you to please restrain yourself and not interrupt the presentation, but to not forget the question, go ahead and use the chat message box. You can find that chat function by looking for the conversation bubble on the menu bar at the bottom. You have the option of chatting to either all participants or to a specific participant by name. And at the end of tonight's session, as we get to the question and answer segment, I'll be using what chat questions that you put into that box to help moderate. And I'm going to call on you individually. So if you remain on the line and allow us, we'll let you ask that question directly when you're called upon. Another note, the presenters from time to time are going to share their screen so that they can provide slides or a PowerPoint presentation for you to view. But we ask you not to share your screen. So please watch out for that big green share screen button in the center and don't hit that during the presentation. I don't want to have to exit you out unnecessarily. During the presentation, I'll be sharing more information about upcoming For Life Live events. One nice note, you can now find many of them on the homepage event calendar at lutheransforlife.org. It's our organizational webpage, and on the very homepage, you scroll down to the bottom, there is an event calendar, and many of our regional, national, and these For Life Live events are placed on that calendar for your review. October 20th, we're going to have an adoption and fostering to adoption, a panel discussion with adoptive families. November 17th and December 1st, sexuality and gender parts 1 and 2. Now, this is an encore presentation with Executive Director Reverend Michael Salamink on what Christians believe and on gospel-motivated responses to the issues of sexuality and gender, especially what the culture gives to us, the motivations and gender dysphoria issues, as well as our responses as gospel-motivated voices for life. And we've had these sessions earlier, but there was great demand, and so we've decided to run them again and allow for new participants, as well as those who want to go through them again and learn more and more. And finally, this year on December 15th, Understanding Depression and Suicide from a Life Ministry Perspective, we'll have our own Director of the Word of Hope, the Deaconess Chrissy Gillette, who will lead us in that presentation. And she's going to focus on worldviews on decisions that lead to suffering, some basic statistics on suicide, some Christian understanding of suffering, and how we as gospel-motivated voices for life can respond. It's going to be an important topic as we go into the Christmas holiday season, so I hope you'll be able to join us. Now, as you know, these For Life Live Zoom events are held regularly on the first and third Tuesday each month. For some reason, I'm forgetting why, but the first Tuesday in November this year, I'm not doing the For Life Live. Something else is happening. Anybody remember what that is? Oh yeah. Go and exercise your Christian vocation as a citizen living in the realm of the kingdom of the left, where God rules by the power of the sword, which in this case is going to be your vote. So we will not get together on the first Tuesday of November. Great lineup is already taking shape for 2021. I'll have more about that to share in future events, and look on Facebook pages.
I've lost my picture here. Okay. All right. Well, I guess we'll just go with that then.
All right. I'm going to ask you to mute. There we go. All right.
Pastor Duncan?
Yes.
There are a few more people you may want to introduce. I see Diane Schroeder, who is a former LFL president, and you might want to introduce her. I see Diane Elbers on the call, and I see Lowell Hybe.
Okay. Well, I think you've gone ahead and done that, Virginia. Very well. Thank you. I didn't get to see all that. So welcome, everybody. I also know that Dr. James Lamb, our former executive director, had asked for an invitation tonight. I'm not sure if he's on here. Dr. Lamb, if you're there, you could greet as well. Okay, all right. So we do have great participation starting for 2021. I'll let you know more about those. I want to remind you, though, that not only is your vote important, but so is your participation as a member of Lutherans for Life. We present these and all that we do as a For Life organization simply because you make it happen. You join your voices through joining our organization as a member. You form life teams in churches, life chapters, and areas. You donate time, resources, and especially your finances. If you've not already become a member of Lutherans for Life or not renewed your membership, please go to our website, www.lutheransforlife.org, and become a member. It's a simple donation button that you can look at. It's a simple form that you can fill out online. And you can even think about becoming a monthly life supporter and get into an automatic deduction so that you don't have to forget about it month after month or year after year. All right, well, let's present our topic for tonight. Since 2014, Reverend Fredric Hinz has served the Minnesota South and North districts of the LCMS as their public policy advocate. As such, he is responsible for monitoring legislative and general cultural developments related to the life issues, marriage and family, religious liberty, and parental choice in education. He communicates the church's perspective on these matters to legislators and other elected officials, and informs pastors of current legislative and judicial happenings so they can, in turn, inform their members. He also represents the districts in various coalitions that speak to a variety of issues, including physician-assisted suicide. He lives in Gaylord, Minnesota with his wife, Rachel. They have 3 children and 11 grandchildren. We welcome Reverend Hinz. In addition to Reverend Hinz, Virginia Flo joined Lutherans for Life in September of 2013 and currently resides in Eagan, Minnesota. And she has spent her life in a dual career, both in business management, working for several major corporations in the Twin City area, as well as making a career in church work. She has worked extensively in the area of Christian education, stewardship, and evangelism, while also serving as a choir director, where she's able to share her love of Christian music with both adults and children. Her business experience has worked in management, marketing, technology, and graphic and visual arts. A strong conviction for life has given her the opportunity to speak on all the life issues with a particular emphasis in the area of physician-assisted suicide, which is being addressed in many states today. She grew up in a family that welcomed foster children who found a safe home with them in the country. And she has authored a Christian fiction novel capturing some of those foster care experiences. She served as LFL Life Chapter President and is now working as our Minnesota Regional Director and helping equip Lutherans to be gospel-motivated voices for life in the Minnesota area. She's also our conference director, and thus she organizes some very fantastic national and regional conferences for LFL, of which we have 2 remaining this year, and I'm sure Virginia would love the opportunity to plug a couple of those as we get started. So please welcome Reverend Hinz and Virginia Flo.
Jeff, just so you know, are you able to see me?
I am, yes.
Okay. My screen is blank. It just has a large Zoom on the front, and up at the top it says post attendee Zoom. I'm assuming I must have accidentally hit a key here that
Well, you're still coming through clear to us. Loud
okay,
and clear.
well, that's fine. We'll just go ahead, but do know that I can't see you.
All right.
All right. So, well, I guess the first thing to say is that when I introduce myself to people and tell them how I serve the church, namely as a public policy advocate, the typical reaction that I get is kind of a glassy-eyed. They don't understand what that is, because of course, for our church body, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, the idea of having somebody intentionally engaged in public policy work is not something that was historically done. and yet, at least here in Minnesota, the two districts, Minnesota North and South, it was felt about a half a dozen years ago now that we really did have a need to have a person who makes it his business, her business, to keep tabs on the various public policy developments and to communicate those developments to our church workers. So at any rate, it's an unusual title, and I wouldn't say an unusual calling, but it is one of those things that so far to my knowledge, I'm the only one that has this title within the LCMS. Various states have split up these duties into different organizations or different individuals. But at any rate, I do serve as the public policy advocate for our state. In my duties in that regard then do include being what I call a digester of materials. I spend a fair amount of time simply being on various sites on a pretty much a daily basis, keeping track of what's going on politically, culturally. I need to be aware of all of those things. In turn, then I report these things to pastors and other interested parties. The most formalized way that I do that is through something called One Voice for Public Policy. It's a roughly a monthly or bi-monthly emailing that I send out to all church workers and other interested folks, in which I kind of summarize what has gone on over the course of the past month and highlight what I think they should be paying attention to. I also convene a group of lay and clergy in what we call our public policy committee. That is a group that meets quarterly. And again, what I tried to do is give them a summary of what's gone on in the various areas that we work on in the past 3 months. I also convene a group of other Lutheran leaders from other Lutheran church bodies, sister church bodies, fellow conservative Lutheran churches. They typically send a representative to this meeting, and again, that's a quarterly thing as well. And frequently we run those two meetings together. I've also been involved in organizing various coalitions. That's one of the first lessons I think that we have learned here in Minnesota, and I'm sure others have learned it as well, that we simply can't be effective in matters of public policy trying to do it on our own. We really do have to find other like-minded individuals and like-minded organizations and churches so that we can be more effective. To that end, we've been instrumental in starting 2 new coalitions over the last several years. One goes by the acronym of OAK, Opportunity for All Kids, that has turned into our state's primary advocacy group for parental choice in education. The other coalition that we have been instrumental in starting is known as the Minnesota Alliance for Ethical Healthcare, and its primary reason for existence is to both oppose physician-assisted suicide and to advocate for better palliative care. So I serve on the board of both of those organizations. Frequently I get asked, if I am a lobbyist. And frankly, I don't like the term very much. I do a small amount of lobbying. In other words, communicating to legislators our viewpoints on various public policy matters. But that really is a small portion of my time. I do on occasion get what I would call our LCMS caucus together, caucus of legislators. In recent years, we've had about 9 senators and representatives that are members of LCMS congregations. So we get them together once in a while. Also, I'm involved in direct contact with congregations frequently, as well as serving as a resource person for pastoral gatherings. And then finally, I have also been fairly active in developing resolutions, both on the district level and on the synodical level, dealing with, again, with one of the public policy matters that we deal with. So, Virginia, have I missed anything?
No, you had. We probably do need to get your screen back, though, if you're going to see the presentation that you're going to give.
Well, I'll pretend like I'm blind.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it can work.
Okay. All right. Okay. So
Somebody left a chat note for him as to what to maybe try to get it back.
Yeah.
Wilma, to everyone, has I don't know if that'll help or not. It's in the chat.
I can't see that.
he can't see it.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, if you see the camera, that it's a camera in a circle, blue circle, if you click that, that will get you back too.
Think so?
Yeah, try that.
Oh, wait a minute. Maybe. Now it asks me to sign in. Uh-oh.
Okay. Well, I can talk while you go
hooray.
out. Hey, there you go. Okay. Well, let me just say, this is Virginia. I am, of course, as Pastor Duncan said, I work for Lutherans for Life, but I have the privilege, since I live in Minnesota, to participate in the Public Policy Committee and work on the same issues that he was talking about, in terms of the fact that we're there to support what he does. I also have the opportunity to participate in the Minnesota Alliance for Ethical Healthcare Coalition that we put together to work on assisted suicide, because Minnesota is a target of Compassion and Choices, if you're familiar with them. And so it's been very beneficial for us to work in that arena, in that coalition, with other faith-based organizations, other medical personnel, other pro-life organizations. So sorry, now that you're back, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thanks. So one of the questions that comes up frequently is, what public policy issues will the church speak to? Obviously, there are many out there, the vast majority of which we as the institutional church will have nothing to say. But basically, we've identified 4 general areas in which we do speak, and those include, first of all, the life issues, and specifically abortion and physician-assisted suicide. Then there's that cluster of issues that involve marriage, family, sexuality. The scriptures speak to that. Our church body has spoken to that in informal ways, and so we also feel free to do so. Also, if we will speak to issues of religious liberty for obvious reasons, and then one specific species of religious liberty, parental choice in education. We have thought that it is important to speak there for a variety of reasons, not the least of which, of course, is that historically our schools have been very important, integral part of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. So at any rate, if an issue falls within one of those areas, we will have something to say. If it doesn't, we will not. Just that simple. That can be irritating to some because there are people who have other issues that are important to them personally, and but we've tried to stay quite narrowly focused on those 4 issues. So with that background, then let me just dive into the particular issue that we're dealing with tonight, namely physician-assisted suicide, and even more specifically, the practical elements of dealing with this topic. So first of all, I tend to assume that you know what we're talking about when we discuss physician-assisted suicide, but in case not, of course, what we're referring to here is that kind of a legal protocol in which doctors are given permission, essentially, to intentionally prescribe drugs that will kill their patients. And so, you know, that's kind of it's a shocking thing to me, yet even while I work on it with some frequency. In the end, you know, looking at it from a pastor's point of view, I guess it shouldn't be a surprising thing that our culture is wrestling with this, simply because it is kind of the natural result of rebellious creatures, sinful creatures like you and I, continuing to act out in the same vein as Adam and Eve in the garden. We always want to be the ones in charge, of course, and to usurp that role from God. And this certainly is one of the most fundamental ways in which we try to do that. One of the things that has added a lot of fuel to the fire here, of course, is the degree to which Darwinian thought has permeated our society, to the degree that people believe that they are not created beings, but rather evolved accidents, as it were. That is the same degree to which they feel free to step in and usurp God's role. And so frequently, I like to remind people, well, first of all, that this is nothing new. This kind of thing has been going on as far back as we know. I just want to read a couple of verses from the book of Isaiah, in which the prophet here sets out the kind of rebellious attitude that I think we're dealing with assisted suicide. So from Isaiah 45, the prophet says, "Woe to him who quarrels with his maker, to him who is but a potsherd. Does the clay say to the potter, 'What are you making?' Does your work say, 'He has no hands'? Woe to him who says to his father, 'What have you begotten?' Or to his mother, 'What have you brought to birth?' This is what the Lord says concerning the things to come. It is I who made the earth and created mankind upon it. My own hand stretched out the heavens, and I marshaled the starry host." That, to me, just kind of crystallizes the kinds of attitudes that are pervasive now in our culture, and that lead to this this push for assisted suicide. All right, so now we as a church body oppose physician-assisted suicide, and we do so for a variety of reasons. The most fundamental, the most basic, the most important of those, of course, would be for theological reasons. And to help the discussion here, I'm going to use a series of slides. I want to give due credit here to the Iowa Lutheran Family Service. They developed this this slideshow that I'm going to be using. I'll be using a portion of it, and so we thank them, and especially Jim Lamb. I know he worked on this pretty carefully, intently. All right, so when we think about our theological concerns when it comes to this topic, we of course are we always bring a triune perspective to things, a trifocal perspective, as it were. We remember that Satan is very active in this world of ours, and so he is the one that has distorted the good creation that God has given us. And one of those distortions, of course, is to begin to think of death as our friend, as it were. Next slide. You're probably familiar with the concept of the culture of death. This was something that originally Pope John Paul II introduced the concept, the metaphor, and clearly we see it all over our in our culture today. Whenever there's a problem, whether it's a crisis pregnancy or some kind of chronic disease or pain or suffering, or even the threat of pain or suffering, the impulse is to turn to death as the savior, as it were. It rarely is presented as it is pictorially here. Usually it is presented just this way, like an angel of light, and so it's very confusing to many people that death ultimately is not our friend, and so we need to make that clear to them. Of course, one of the ways that the topic is presented that makes it difficult is the terms that are used change over time. They change depending upon the circumstance. So while I've been using the term physician-assisted suicide, some use doctor-assisted, some death with dignity is a phrase that's heard frequently, the right to die, and then of course euthanasia. I think it probably is worth taking a minute to distinguish between euthanasia and assisted suicide. Assisted suicide, when that is practiced, the person who's going to die is the one that is the active agent. They actually take the pill, pills, typically about 100 pills is what they need to consume. And so they are the active agent. With euthanasia, someone else, typically a doctor or some medical person, is the one that actually administers the medication that will kill. So at any rate, keeping the terminology straight is one of the challenges in this area. So again, this is nothing new. This covering of evil with a white, bright covering. Isaiah puts it this way: woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. We run into this frequently, not just related to this topic, but in so many ways in our world, especially in our culture these days. One of the ways in which the negative aspects of this are covered over, are using deceptive terminology. So, for example, most states that have enacted some kind of physician-assisted suicide legislation, they always include something like this, where they say that the actions taken in accordance with this bill, that is the suicide, for any purpose, shall not for any purpose constitute suicide, assisted suicide, mercy killing, or homicide under the law. And so they specifically bar you from using the correct descriptive terms, and in so doing, they obfuscate and try to paper over the act that's being committed. One of the things that we need to remember is that our Christian view of the world is a contrast to the view of the world that the majority of our fellow citizens probably hold. One of those Christian understandings that conflicts with the popular culture is this idea that death is a good thing. Scripture, of course, tells us just the opposite. Obviously, from Romans, the wages of sin is death. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. In the end, while it's tempting to start to cast death as our friend, and as a pastor, I know how tempting that is, particularly at a time of loss for a family. It's important that we not give in to that temptation to portray it as a friend. It is an enemy. It is our greatest enemy, and that, of course, is what Christ has conquered. And so, you know, the popular idea that death is just a part of life, that flies in the face of what Scripture tells us right from the beginning, when it says, "And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good, and death was not a part of that." Again, from Corinthians, "Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." Here Paul is mocking death. He is taunting it, and that is the appropriate attitude to take. Again, that flies in the face of much of what we find in culture generally. Another theological understanding that we as Christians have that conflicts with the culture has to do with the value of human life. Here, of course, you can see an comical illustration of Darwinian evolution. Unfortunately, that is the image that people carry with them from their high school days and in biology class, through college and so forth. Evolution is presented as a fact when it clearly is not. But nevertheless, once that is imprinted in people's minds, that colors everything that they see in life, including this question of how much value does human life have. We'll go to the next slide. So, for example, for a person who carries a Darwinian view, this is probably the way they envision the relative value of human life as we go through a person's lifetime. Pre-born, prior to birth, they would assign no value whatsoever. Then all of a sudden, as a young person, a child, life is assigned its greater value, and then there's just the slow slide until later in adulthood, when there's probably a more precipitous decline in their view of the value of human life. That's the image that people carry with them and that they operate out of. As Christians, we understand that our value is not determined by our age. It is not determined by what we are able to do or unable to do. We have values simply because we are created in God's image. It's just that simple. And once that becomes the controlling factor for us, then the idea of intentionally killing another person becomes abhorrent to us. So just so we understand then that a Christian view of life carries with it a very different view of the value of human life. The other thing that is very different in the way Christians view the world has to do with suffering. Typically, most people would try nearly anything to avoid suffering. It has, again, it's permeated the culture. We give the impression through our various, through advertising, through our appeal to the medical sciences and so forth, we start to give the impression that it's possible to avoid nearly all suffering, and if suffering occurs, it has no value. So I think we'll go to the next slide. So as a Christian, our view is formed by a passage like this one. And we know that for all those who love God, all things work together for good to those who are called according to his purpose. All things. And that would include the various elements of suffering in our life. That is a very perplexing concept to those who are not Christians. And then, of course, Paul goes on to say, he who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things? When we understand that suffering can be a good thing, it changes our view of the world in general, and specifically about intentionally causing death. So as Christians, how can suffering be a blessing to us? Well, obviously, it does provide the opportunity for God to display his power. Healing does occur. And when that happens, frequently medical people are left unable to explain it. And clearly, God's power is seen in that. We also believe that suffering can be used by God to discipline us. And just like, a good parent on occasion will inflict perhaps some small amount of pain on their child because they love them, the same thing is true for God. God also uses our suffering to strengthen our faith. We hear that frequently from those who have been through difficult times that include suffering. They come out on the other side with a greatly increased faith. Also, we understand that suffering is useful, is helpful, because in the end, then we are much more empathetic, sympathetic to others. When we've been through suffering ourselves, we're able to come alongside others in their suffering. And then finally, we understand that suffering can be helpful because it gives people the opportunity to give us assistance. It allows them to minister to us, which to the one receiving that ministry, that can be uncomfortable sometimes, but it's important. And so in all of these ways, the Christian understands that suffering can be a positive thing. And even though we don't go out looking for it, still God uses it in a beneficial way for us and for those around us. So that's just a snapshot of some of the theological considerations that play into this as Christian people. But there are also other elements of this. But before I get into that, perhaps I should just pause. Virginia, anything that you'd like to add at this point?
If I could just add to the chart that you had that showed the decline in value of human life as people get older, I think that was so vivid during our coronavirus that we still are going through. I got a call one day from our friend Reverend Wheatley, who is, in charge of a chaplaincy program at one of our major hospice facilities in the Upper Midwest, and he needed to talk, I think, to somebody and talk about how disturbed he was that he was losing patients in their hospice facilities because of the coronavirus, not because of what they were there for. And how disturbing that was, that people's attitude was, it's okay, they're just old. And we know that people can graduate from hospice, that isn't a death sentence. And it's a great place to be for comfort and care, and be it palliative care or whatever it is when we need it. But to think that it's okay that people will die, and it's because they're old that's an acceptable thing. We know that we have no death in our Christian beliefs because we have that promise of eternal life. And so we have no fear because of that. But the world's view is not quite the same. And so when people lose their quality of life, as people would put it, then all of a sudden death seems to be okay to the folks in the world. And it simply is not, and it's not necessary. God didn't promise that we wouldn't suffer. And it's just, but the promises that we have are so exciting. And Dr. Lamb coined the phrase created, redeemed, called, and we've used it ever since. That God created us because he loved us. When we fell into sin, he redeemed us, and he has that call to us for an eternal relationship with him through the waters of baptism. And so those are my comments. Thank you.
Very good. So in addition to our theological reasons for opposing assisted suicide, there are a whole host of other, what you might call more practical reasons, reasons that a person, you don't have to be a Christian to understand these other reasons. And so at this point, I'm going to switch to a different set of slides, and we'll talk about what some of these other considerations are. So when we look at these other things that threaten the common good, they break down into four basic categories of things that people need to be aware of. The first of these, as you can see, is that a physician-assisted suicide very easily devolves into an abuse various categories of people: the weak, the poor, marginalized, the vulnerable. Otherwise, we also find that it leads to corruptions within the medical community, and specifically in the doctor-patient relationship. It damages the integrity of the family. And finally, it's a great offense to human dignity and equality. So I'm going to expand a little bit on each of those.
Okay, I'm trying to move it.
Okay.
There we go.
All right. So physician-assisted suicide. First of all, typically when this is advocated for, when they are trying to pass this kind of legislation, first of all, they are very insistent, typically, that we are talking about assisted suicide and not euthanasia. However, we know from experience in Europe, in Canada, and even here in the United States, that if assisted suicide is legalized, that very quickly moves into euthanasia, where again, the person is no longer the active agent, but someone is doing it to them. As you can see, one of the kinds of arguments that are used is that, well, if assisted suicide is good for adults, for people who are mentally aware and alert and competent, well, then why should that benefit be denied to others, whether they are too young to express that, whether they're infants, whether that people have dementia, whether they're disabled. So very quickly, again, death is portrayed as a friend, and therefore, why shouldn't everybody have access to this beneficial protocol? So also, when this kind of legislation is proposed, there are typically many safeguards that are included in this. Those safeguards at first blush seem like they are probably address most of the concerns that people have. But what we find out in reality is, first of all, the safeguards are not as effective as they might seem. And over time, those safeguards are very quickly removed. Usually, physicians, a lot of weight is placed on their assessment of just what quality of life people have, and very soon doctors are placed in this position of being a decider between life and death. Many physicians, most physicians, do not want that responsibility, and therefore, typically they oppose any kind of legalization like this. In some studies that have been done, they find that when physicians are asked to evaluate the quality of life that a person has, and then they ask the person themselves how they view their quality of life, typically physicians have a much lower view. They see the quality of life as much lower, much less than the person themselves. That should, I think, give us pause for giving this kind of control to anybody.
Listening to this on suicide.
Pastor, if I could add to
Yes.
that, too, that if a physician, I do encourage people to ask their physicians what their view is. So if you come to a point in your life when you will be dealing with end of life decisions, that you know that they're there to assist you and safeguard. And that if people are looking to do assisted suicide and they start doing doctor shopping, that doctor doesn't know them at all. They have no concept of who they are and what their state of mind might be. And therefore, they're going to definitely make some wrong assessments.
That's right. So another area of concern has to do with the prevalence of mental illness or psychiatric illness. Typically, what leads to a request for assisted suicide is, first of all, some kind of a perception of hopelessness in a person's life. That in turn leads to depression, clinical depression, and ultimately then they are led to request the doctor to assist them in killing themselves. Now, interestingly, it has been discovered, it's been shown that about 95% of those who ask to have their life ended have a psychiatric illness. On the flip side of this, only about 5% of those who have actually been given a prescription, the fatal prescription, have actually received psychiatric evaluation. That's a huge disparity. And so in the end, there is not nearly the level of care that should be taken to make sure that people are not requesting this simply because they're ill, psychologically ill. Some other issues that cause concern. First of all, typically the legislation requires that there be 2 witnesses and that there be more than one request on the part of the person wanting to die. Interestingly, the witnesses that are required, there's very little restriction on who can be a witness. For example, one of the 2 witnesses can be someone who stands to inherit from the person, and the other can easily be their friend. There just are no real safeguards when it comes to providing these kind of witnesses. Virginia already alluded to the fact that when most people think about physician-assisted suicide, they imagine that they're dealing with their own doctor, somebody that they have developed a close relationship with over many years, who knows them. But most often that is not the case. Most family doctors want nothing to do with physician-assisted suicide and will not participate in that. And therefore, most people then will go out essentially doctor shopping and until they find somebody. And typically those doctors are associated with Compassion and Choices. Typically, you might have one physician or one clinic writing 80-90% of all the doctor's orders for assisted suicide in an area or even in a state. Also, most people are not aware that typically when a physician is treating their patient, they are responsible to be professionally competent. If it can be demonstrated that they're not professionally competent, then of course they're open to lawsuit and that sort of thing. But when it comes to physician-assisted suicide, they do not have to meet that level of that fiduciary level. All they have to do is act in what is called good faith. If they act in good faith, then legally they are in the clear. It's a very, very low bar for them, much lower than they experience in any other area of their practice.
Could I just add that if someone doesn't know what C&C is or Compassion and Choice, it's the old Hemlock Society that is out supporting and promoting assisted suicide.
Yes. They are by far the most active group in the United States, very well funded, very persistent. Some other things to take into consideration. Most legislation, when it is first written, requires that there be a prognosis of no more than 6 months to live. However, that is a very subjective thing, obviously. Interestingly, so for example, if you have diabetes typically is a chronic disease, but not a life-threatening disease in the main. However, if it's not treated, then it becomes a disease that can kill you. And so for the purposes of physician-assisted suicide, diabetes can be considered a condition that would qualify you for assisted suicide untreated. So it seems really perverse to me that something that can easily and routinely be controlled can still be considered a legitimate reason to request assisted suicide. I'll also say the idea of restricting the assisted suicide to those who have only that amount to live, that has gone by the wayside. For example, in Canada, it started out that way, but only in a short period of time, within a couple of years, that has been eliminated, taken out of the law. The same thing is true in Europe. So what sounds so good initially is only temporary. Also, of course, there are questions about how the pills are actually consumed. Does there have to be somebody there that can attest to the fact that it was a voluntary thing? That is not required. Can people be pressured into taking these fatal medications? Yes, and you would never know because there is no requirement for what you might call a neutral third party to be present. Can minors consent to having themselves killing themselves? We of course say that minors cannot give consent to a wide variety of actions legally, and yet for this purpose, already in places again like Canada and Europe, the minors are capable of receiving assisted suicide. Also, a variety of disabilities qualifies people. And then finally, in the end, in many places, simply psychological suffering is enough to qualify as well. It becomes very loose, and what seems to start out as a very highly regulated protocol becomes open-ended, free for all. Most people are unaware of that. So we also are concerned about what assisted suicide does to the practice of medicine and to the relationship of doctors and their patients. The American Medical Association has come out against this just recently. They restated their opposition to physician-assisted suicide. In the end, as it says here, eliminating pain and suffering can very easily morph into eliminating the patient. And even the doctor themselves, they're not always aware of their own motivations. And so it's just very dangerous. It's a slippery slope. Also, as this ethicist John Finnis has stated, when you change the law, you also change the way people look at life itself. Leon Cass has stated, even the most contentious physician needs protection against himself and his weaknesses. Medical professionals are no different than you and I. They are sinful, fallen human beings. And so for that reason, because they understand that probably better than we do, by and large, they want nothing to do with this. And that's a good thing. When doctors are engaged in this kind of activity, obviously the patient's trust level may suffer because of that. If you know that your doctor may be evaluating you to determine if your quality of life is good enough to justify your continued life, what does that do to a relationship? In the end, people will no longer feel free to speak honestly with their providers because they just don't know. It enters a whole new level of uncertainty enters the relationship. Obviously, there are some financial incentives that we need to be aware of that are quite easily understood. Obviously, insurance providers, they have an incentive to push people toward ending their life sooner rather than later. It's better for the bottom line. And the same kind of motivation would apply to government. You know, as government-funded healthcare becomes more common, and depending on the election in a few weeks, it may be more common still. In the end, when people begin to view treatments as a waste of the public's money, there will be lots of pressures. And in the end, as it says on the bottom, the right to die will very quickly become felt as the duty to die. And then the impact that assisted suicide has on the family, it disrupts this natural cycle where life at its beginning and at its end is marked by great dependency, and that is a good thing. It binds us all together as a human family. That is largely lost. Family love and obligation are then placed in opposition to the image of the individual as a sole entity. So again, it's destructive of the family in general. It also undermines faith-based institutions and community groups who find their reason for being, to some degree, in providing care for those who are dependent. There was an interesting article that Gilbert Meilander produced, oh, this is probably 10 years ago, but you probably saw it on the last slide. I want to be a burden to my family. When I first read that, I thought, did I misread that? Because of course, what we frequently hear from other people is, oh, I don't want to be a burden to my family.
Pastor,
Yes.
I was going to say back, if you remember, folks remember back to Maggie Carner, who was our LCMS life ministry director at synod level. When she developed a brain tumor and she was diagnosed as 6 months to live, she did last 1.5 years. But one of the statements that she made that was so profound is she had 3 daughters, and she said, I want them to learn servanthood in caring for me.
That was powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm aware that time is slipping by rather quickly here. So I think I'm going to just end this portion of it. I think you can see that there are a wide variety of reasons that have essentially nothing to do with Christian faith that would give people pause before rather than entering into this new world of physician-assisted suicide. So at this point, I guess I'd like to switch into a more practical vein and tell you a little bit about how we here in Minnesota have organized ourselves to effectively try to prevent this legalization. There are some unilateral means, of course, that we in our church body, the LCMS, have used. Obviously, through our preaching and teaching, we emphasize that we are in fact created in God's image, that it is God's call as to the number of our days and so forth. We also, I'll just very quickly put out a plug for something that we put out here. I don't know if you can read that or not, but this is called One Voice for Public Policy. And then this is our 2020 Lutheran Voter Information Guide. This just came out this last week. And it includes a discussion about physician-assisted suicide and relates it to the current political season. If anybody's interested in getting that and reading it, I'd be more than happy to send that to them. Or perhaps, Jeff, you could, if I sent it to you, you could be a clearinghouse for that.
Absolutely.
So, okay. Those are some of the means by which we work by ourselves. We also work with other church bodies, most especially the Roman Catholic Church. We've developed a really close working relationship with the bishops and archbishop here in Minnesota. We've had a meeting of our district presidents with the bishops focused on these public policy matters and specifically on physician-assisted suicide. So there's a very close collegial relationship that has formed, and that has been very helpful in numerous instances. And then finally, there are what I term more multilateral ways in which we work. And that would include the coalition that I mentioned earlier, Minnesota Alliance for Ethical Healthcare. That is a really big tent organization. It includes not just churches, but certainly elder care organizations, disability rights organizations, medical groups, nurses, professional groups, and so forth, all of which have a huge stake in this issue. And so we've brought all of those groups together, and it's formed a pretty effective working relationship. I think Virginia could attest to that. she sits on that committee as well.
Yeah, I think what's really important about that group is the fact that when we first got together, and Pastor Hinz co-chairs that with Jason Atkins, the Minnesota executive director of the Minnesota Catholic Conference, believe it or not. But I think that the key to this is that that relationship has allowed us to cross lines that we never would have crossed before in terms of things that are related to life. And I know that when we had opportunity to do testimonials at a legislative hearing regarding getting, not allowing physician-assisted suicide to get to the floor of the Senate, we all brought people to testify, and the power of all of those folks working together was quite amazing, because at the end of that day, the senator who, put the bill in front of the committee withdrew it. And of course, her argument was that we all needed more education, that we didn't quite understand what this was all about. But in reality, she knew she didn't have the strength to get it passed after all these powerful testimonies. So the joining together. And I think the other thing that is critical about that organization is when we first got together, we didn't want to just be against something. We wanted to be for something. We're for life. And so that's where you get the idea that it's the Minnesota Alliance for Ethical Healthcare. And that includes better hospice care, better palliative care, all the things that would help people to want to, not take their life because there's help here for them.
Right. So just to tick off some of the things that this coalition does, first of all, we are professionally managed. In other words, there's a public policy, searching for the right term here, a professional group that manages organizations like this. So they help us monitor what goes on in the legislature, make us aware of any rumblings if there are legislators that are intending to introduce legislation, we become aware of it quickly. We also monitor the organizations that advocate for physician-assisted suicide. That's very important. Ron, I think you mentioned that earlier, and that is extremely important to keep an eye on what's going on essentially on the other side. As Virginia indicated, we organize testifiers for legislative committee hearings. We recruit partner organizations to stand with us. I believe at this time, our Minnesota group has roughly 50 partners. Again, they come from all different areas, elder care, disability rights, and so forth. But to bring everybody together to speak with one voice is really an important thing. We've also done some film screenings. I don't know if any of you have seen the feature film Fatal Flaws. We've shown that both in congregational settings, on campuses, and in a variety of other places. And that provides just a wonderful opportunity for discussion. Then we also actually developed legislation specifically we did for better palliative care. So one of the other things that we do is also to get a sense, do some polling to get a sense of where public attitudes are. And so I'm going to share just a few slides with you about a survey, a poll that we took. Well, it's back in 2016 now, so it's a little bit dated, but I think still very useful. It's a very high quality survey poll. It's done, as you can see here, by a public policy or public affairs company, Himley Rapp. Anyway, it's it's very well done. And as you can see, we polled 800 people, and it includes all the standard kinds of assurances that this is a reliable poll. Probably the most interesting thing, we took a survey, a poll of people's attitudes, both at the beginning of the survey and then at the end. And let's see, Virginia, I think we want to go
Farther.
a little further. Yep, farther. One more. Sorry. Okay, so this is the probably one of the most interesting slides. We simply didn't know where Minnesotans would come down on this issue. And what we found out, rather disturbingly from my point of view, is that it's pretty evenly split in our state. You see that 46% of the respondents thought it should be legal, 43% thought it should be illegal. The darker hue in each of those bars, so that the 12%, that indicates the percentage of people that feel strongly, in this case, that it should be legal. 23% felt strongly that it should be illegal. So even though we are roughly split evenly, the passion clearly is on our side of the ledger. So we'll continue.
Yeah. Okay.
We're going to slide 14, actually.
Okay. I don't know what slide.
I'll tell you when to stop.
Okay.
Sorry about this.
That's okay.
There. So one of the things that we hope to accomplish with this polling was to find out how people thought about this topic. And so we asked them to select words that kind of capture their basic feeling about assisted suicide. And you can see that the first three terms, the most frequently chosen, complicated, frightening, risky, all indicate this level of dis-ease that people have, even among those who support it. They still have these feelings. And then you can go all the way down. The reason that we chose to include this in the survey was to help developing the messaging that we would use in any communications that we had with the public. We would try to amplify and to restate these feelings that this is too complicated. It's just plain frightening and so forth. So at any rate, this organization helps us to develop these messaging, better messaging capacity. Okay, then we're going to go through about 14 slides here to the post survey.
It's not letting me move. There we go. Well.
So what we're going to see here in just a minute are the results of the survey after they've had this conversation with the interviewer. Okay, oh, back one more. No.
Too far?
Too far.
Sorry. Oh, no.
Oh my, okay.
It took us out. I'm sorry. Let's see.
Well, I'll just describe it. So after the interview was taken, then people were asked again what their viewpoint was. And to be honest, not a lot of the percentages didn't change. Largely, it was still pretty close to even. But what did change was that the that portion of the people who felt strongly about it increased even more. So the bottom line is we simply learned that when we educate people about this topic, we gain. In other words, people become much more passionate, much more committed to preventing it from becoming legalized. And that's important for us to know. When you talk about investing a significant number of resources, dollars, into a campaign, you want to know that there is a chance to actually impact public opinion. So I think at this point, I'm going to stop. There are a number of organizations that I think anybody who's interested in this topic should be aware of. For somebody like me or Virginia, we're happy to come and talk to your congregation or pastors or whatever. But frankly, things change so quickly in these matters that it's really much more important that you become directly connected with other organizations that are better set up for giving you quick, reliable information. So this listing is one that it's certainly not exhaustive. There are other places you can go, but I would recommend these. The Patient Rights Action Fund. This is the preeminent group in the United States fighting the same battle that we are. Very professional in the way they operate, very effective in the way they operate, and just a wealth of information. They send out periodic updates, what's going on in all the various states. This is one that you'd want to be aware of and check in with. Obviously, state level groups, in our case, Minnesota, Minnesota Alliance for Ethical Healthcare. We have a website that you can consult, and when people indicate an interest and give us their contact information, then we send out notices to them whenever something noteworthy is happening. Another important group, the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. This actually is headquartered in Canada, and so it tends to focus more on happenings, Canadian happenings, but that's really helpful because, of course, on this topic, the Canadians are a matter of 4 or 5 or 6 years ahead of us. So if you want to know what's likely to happen here in the United States, pay attention to what's going on in Canada right now. There's also another site, LifeSite. This too, very reliable and very timely. Some of the most cutting edge news I get through this site. It is a Roman Catholic in its leanings, but still, I find much valuable information here. Obviously, Lutherans for Life is also a place to consult, though Lutherans for Life, is not the type of organization that is putting out daily updates on current events. But clearly, much good information there. One I'd highly recommend, the Breakpoint Daily. This is John Stonestreet is the primary writer here. This is just such a superb daily digest of what's going on in the culture. And he frequently talks about assisted suicide. Another site that also frequently comments on this is the Federalist. And then there are others here as well. But it's simply important for you to be connected with not necessarily all of these, but at least some of them to stay aware of what's happening.
And those are listed on, if you got the handout, I don't know, Pastor Duncan, if you sent that out to folks or not, but there is a handout that has it printed out.
Yes, the handout was attached to an email today. If you scroll up in the chats as well, there is a link to the document for this event, which is the handout. So you can scroll up in the chats and see that link, and it's been posted there as well.
So just in way of conclusion then, just let me say that clearly when we think about the life issues, obviously abortion is the one that rises to the surface first, but very quickly assisted suicide is coming to occupy almost an equal standing in a negative sense. I know that it's difficult, that there's a certain amount of fatigue that sets in with respect to to abortion. I don't think that's the case to the same degree when it comes to physician-assisted suicide. And so I believe this is actually an area that we can kind of revitalize all of the life issue advocacy that we do by giving equal attention to this. So with that, I think I don't know if we have any time remaining for Q&A or not, but.
Sure we do. If folks want to continue to stay on, I see the time is 8:30 and that is our advertised time, but I will certainly stay on if the presenters are willing to stay on. Okay. Then those who have to go, we thank you for your attendance. Those who can continue to stay, the question and answer begins now. And Ronnie had a question that was put at the very beginning when you were listing some of the different issues that were sanctity of life issues. Ronnie, you want to talk about that one?
Well, it wasn't so much a question, but you talked about school choice as being one of your emphases. And just the comment was with the increasingly widespread adoption of comprehensive sexuality education, which is a program that's basically designed by Planned Parenthood to sell more abortions. My point is that that school choice is very quickly becoming a sanctity of life issue as well.
I couldn't agree more.
Is there something that your coalition is developing in answer to those school choice issues?
Yes, it's the other coalition that I mentioned, Opportunity for All Kids. I think most of our viewers here are probably aware that the frequency with which we hear about parental choice in education, school choice, is increasing quickly. It has become a cause that virtually all conservative people seem to be embracing in a way that was not true even a couple of years ago. So I think we have a unique moment in time, in political time, to advance this. And I'm optimistic. We've had some very positive judicial rulings, Supreme Court rulings over the last couple of years. Just this summer, the Espinoza ruling, maybe you recall that, has given us much more momentum and much more legal levers to move this forward. We're excited.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Rick Andrews, are you still on?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Rick, you had a couple of questions. I'd like to give you the opportunity to address those.
Great, thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation very much so. I'm on the West Coast in California and do a couple of support groups that deal around grief share and some suicide programs and the like. This topic in particular had not come up, but a topic that does come up regularly are the DNRs, the do not resuscitates. And I'm wondering if any kind of discussions have taken place that blend the two together as being a form of assisted suicide by not allowing certain treatments to take place for those that have diseases and other disabilities or debilitating issues. And then the other question that I had on a similar topic was, well, I guess that one first would be the main primary.
Yes, in this Big Tent coalition that we are a part of, I would say probably the most active element of that is the disability community, trying to drive home the point that physician-assisted suicide inevitably will impact negatively that group, in a disproportionate way to as opposed to the general population. So we have collected what we think are compelling stories that indicate how physician-assisted suicide can be abused when it comes to those with disabilities, and we simply try to get them out into the popular mind as best we can.
But it would be the opinion of the coalition that in the groups that you're involved with, that an aggressive DNR stands for some, like I have multiple sclerosis and I have a DNR. And I know when I've taken that in, even to the least of surgeries, like a cataract surgery that I had, they place big emphasis on looking at that and saying, almost like it's so drastic of a move that it is could be categorically in the same area of what we're talking about tonight with assisted suicide, just by the refusal of certain treatments and so forth. So the question would be specifically, does that fall in the range of what you look at in terms of trying to add a better or different perspective biblically on?
Yeah. To be honest, I can't say that we have spent much time on that.
Okay.
We have not.
Okay. And then the second half of that same question was back to the suicide people or portions. In the more traditional sense of a suicide, does Lutherans for Life have an aggressive strategy in terms of helping when those situations arise and you have someone that is in more of a traditional mindset, or is it more of let's get into the hotline kind of a approach or philosophy for those existing embedded means of dealing with those types of issues?
Well, we have, as far as Lutherans for Life goes, we have our Word of Hope ministry that, as much as it's established for abortion, post-abortion counseling, has found that we've gotten a lot of calls, at least lately, for suicide folks that are anticipating wanting to do that. And so we've been doing some counseling in that area. So it's really we have found, the suicide rates have gone up with the coronavirus and people are finding themselves. I think what's really sad in our country today is that people view suicide in two different ways. It's okay to do suicide as assisted suicide, and yet it's not okay if someone takes their life who is, it doesn't have a terminal illness.
Right.
We view life differently, and that's what's wrong. All life is valuable. All life should be protected. And so it becomes an educational thing. We talk about it a lot. We need to continue to educate.
This is a good step in that process for sure. So thank you for what you're doing this evening.
It's an interesting thing, I think, that assisted suicide is frequently one of the reasons that people give to advocate for it, is that they say it will decrease the level of suicide in general in the population. It has acted in just the opposite way. It has actually succeeded in normalizing it. And so the number of non-doctor assisted suicides actually is considerably higher in states and countries where physician-assisted suicide is legal. Just the opposite of what was stated.
Interesting. Okay, well, that was mine. Thank you very much for taking the questions.
Thank you very much, Rick. Look forward to chatting with you more. John Johnson, you had a question for us tonight.
Actually, this is Jenny, his
Hi,
wife.
Jenny.
I'm an LCMS parish nurse here in Northern Idaho. So I want to give you a scenario that's frequently that comes up. I've asked my pro-life pastors, and I wouldn't say they dodged the question, but I can tell they're struggling with this answer a little bit. So hopefully there's enough pro-life Lutherans for Life pastors here who can help give me some insight. So picture an 88-year-old who is worshiping at church, and then a week later she collapses. They put her in the hospital. They run all the tests. She's got a weak heart. Find out that she's loaded with cancer all over her insides. So if you give her an IV, it shifts into her lungs, so it makes her breathing more labored. So she literally goes downhill that fast. If you give her an NG tube or a gastrostomy tube and try to feed her, it makes the pain in her abdomen from the cancer worse. Her son or daughter is medical power of attorney. So they're making decisions for her now because she's semi-comatose and she's totally trusted them. They're all Christians actively worshiping, involved in their church. So the question comes up, you start the morphine drip, and you know that even if you give the teeny tiniest dose of an IV morphine drip, she's going to slip into a coma. She's going to stop eating, stop drinking. Death's going to follow, generally 12 to 24 hours. And this repeats, this is a pretty common problem. So the question becomes, is the initiation of the morphine drip IV assisted living because the son is asking for it on behalf of his mother or the daughter? The physician or the nurses are giving it. Hospice, this is commonly done in hospice care. Or is it euthanasia because, because you're administering this drug, which death is going to follow? So the answers I get from my pro-life pastors is, if this person's in the process of dying and you're eliminating pain. So could you please elucidate this situation? Do you have any other insight to provide for me?
Well,
don't all jump at once.
Yeah, typically, so much depends on the intent. The very same amount of morphine that would cause relief of discomfort, is the same, can be the same amount that will actually push a person into, as you said, coma and eventually death. So in my mind, and I've heard quite a few people speak about this, when it is given with the intent of removing suffering, giving comfort, that is a legitimate way of acting, a Christian way of acting, even though it may have a secondary effect that might hasten death. It's a difficult case, of course, but in the end, so much of it depends on the intent.
That's a great way for me to describe that now as a parish nurse. It's the intent. The intent is to ease the suffering with the tiniest dose possible, not to, like in Seattle, when I was practicing there, one of the hospitals had what we call scheduled dosing. They would give massive amounts of morphine, and that would push death. So I guess it's a matter of degree. So I appreciate that. That helps a little bit.
We have something you can download on our website, and I can't tell you right off the top of my head what it is, but Pastor Chris Wheatley, who I talked about earlier as the hospice chaplain, put together a list of questions that he would put together for families to review when they're looking at a facility to put their parents or whatever into, to make sure that where you were putting them was going to do ethical end of life care, and that it wasn't just an issue of massive morphine doses and without concern for, one of the things you want to make sure is that, if they are comatose, that they can have their end time, they can have time with their family, and that they aren't, put into a coma and not able to do that. And if they aren't in major pain, then the question would be, why are you giving them masses of doses of morphine. So, those are the things that have to be done as Pastor, Hinz talked about. When we talk about Christian ethics, the Christian ethic is always to care, never to kill. And so we say we can and should allow the dying to die, but we should never intend for the death of the living. And there's a real fine line between, that in this particular case. We want to keep people comfortable. That's the palliative care. And, but we don't want to do something that enhances the death.
Jenny, I would also add that it's important for the pastor to be involved in that family decision-making in these end times. And it's a good idea not to just have just the physician or just the nursing care providing this input, but that you have the opportunity for the pastor to explore that intent with those individuals who are making these decisions so that he can bring the word of God to bear into this situation. And everyone is going to be very unique and different. And so it is important for the family to get that pastoral care involved in that situation too.
It's also important that we each have a healthcare directive for the end of our life, so that we assign people as our representatives, and we cannot speak for ourselves that share our beliefs. It's really, really important. The Christian Life Resources, which is the Wisconsin, the Wells part, they have a life organization there that we work very closely with. If you go to their website, Christian Life Resources, they have one of those for end of life healthcare directive for every state. And it's a free download. It's a wonderful thing to have. We should all have one of those in addition to our will at the end of life.
Thank you. Thank you. Barb Geisfeld, I think you had a comment about the value of life.
Yes, when we were watching Pastor Hinz's little slideshow there, he had the graph where preborns are worth 0, and then you're born, and then your worth gradually tapers off. And I had made a comment to my husband, and he made a comment back that was very insightful. I don't know if you can see this either, but think of the graph. We had the preborn was down at 0, and then when you were born, you went up to 5. Well, that line across the bottom is just barely, let's just say it's a 0, but it's in red so you can see it. That's what the world thinks the handicapped, the mentally deficient, the elderly people, the sick people, the comatose people, the quadriplegics, that's their value in the world. It's the same as nobody has any value if you're not doing something. So that's the world's value for everybody that's not perfect. And then at the very top, since 5 is our top, God's idea of the value of everybody is a constant 5 right across the top.
That's an excellent insight and leads right into the 2021 Life Sunday theme, from invisible to indispensable. And I think you're echoing that. So I would encourage everybody. I know those Life Sunday materials have hit the LFL website to take a look at that theme and make that application within your life teams, life chapters, and within your churches. Thank you, Barb, for that. There was a question about whether these slides would be available after this presentation. And Kim Laub, who was from the Lutheran Family Services in Iowa, has put at the bottom that she would be open to making the slides available to anybody who asks. So if you have a desire for these slides, if you'll email me, jduncan@Lutheransforlife, then I will make sure that we get those slides to you. I'll get them from Kim.
Kim, that's just the first portion of the slides we used, was the one from Lutheran Family Services.
Okay.
There were slides that Pastor Hinz, you brought along, so you'll have to.
Pastor Hinz, then you'll have to answer the second part of that question. Are yours available, or would you like to share those?
Certainly, I'd be happy to share them.
Okay, well then you can email those to me, and I can again get those out to anybody who asks for them. Okay. I had a question.
Jeff, I should probably interrupt. I'm probably not at liberty to send the survey ones. It's not my property to dispense. So
Gotcha. All right. You were discussing how there was a lack of the physician input, and you said that the standard for the physician to operate was in good faith versus, I can't remember the other term that you used there. But what does it mean for a doctor to operate in good faith when assisting at the death of his or her patient?
well, as I understand it, it simply means that they have good intentions. And of course, that's all very subjective, which means that there is no standard, and therefore the doctor is essentially not accountable. A professional competency standard, that is much more objective, not entirely, but and so this shift, it's included in these assisted suicide protocols simply to remove any obstacle on the part of the medical provider. They don't have to worry about the legalities at all.
Okay, all right. Wilma, are you still on? You had a question about the 5 Wishes book. Wilma may not be on. Her question was, what is your opinion of the 5 Wishes printed by Aging with Dignity? This was recommended by her parish nurse in Arizona. What is your opinion about that book? Are you familiar?
I am not familiar with that.
Not either.
Okay, so there's a resource to look into. We'll get some insight in that. Okay.
I am on. Can you hear me?
Hi, Wilma. Okay.
I found the unmute button. It's a lovely document. It is a legal document here in Arizona. And my daughter in Seattle, Washington said it's legal up there too. And it's, how do you wish to be at your very ending? What do you wish? And it refers to the DNR, DNI. Do you want your family to be with you? It just discusses several things that you can say, and these are your 5 wishes as you are approaching that winter of your life. It's a very interesting document, but it is legal.
Very good. Do you have a copy of that document you can email to me, Wilma?
Yes, I think I can. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes, I will.
That would be wonderful, and then I can send that off to the other parties there.
And how do I email? How do I send that to you?
jduncan@lutheransforlife.org.
Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, very good. Thank you. I will.
All right.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
I think just as an aside, we run into this with abortion when people say, well, abortion's legal, it must be okay. And there are 9 states that have legalized assisted suicide, but just if it's legal in those states, people sometimes don't understand it's not okay. Just something to keep in mind. And as more states are, go that route, hopefully they won't. As an aside, I think it's important to know that many states have either not acted on it or voted it down in their legislatures versus those that have legalized it. So there is hope. This isn't a failing thing where just because it's brought up in your state that it's automatically going to pass. I think the greater issue is if it ever becomes a referendum and goes to the people, because as we found out in our survey, unless they're educated on the facts that go with it, they don't always, they look at it as an okay thing.
Yeah, I think I should have mentioned this earlier. At this point in time, there are something like 7 or 8 states, or perhaps 9, where it's legal. However, every year there are at least 20 states that in which this kind of legislation is introduced, and in the last 2 years, essentially all of those states have declined to legalize it. Now, part of that has to do with the COVID situation this past legislative session. I suspect the advocacy for this will have new vigor this coming legislative session. So you'll want to pay particular attention to what's going on in your state legislatures this coming year, 2021.
Thank you for that. I think, Joseph, if you're still on, Joseph Meisner, you had some comments that in regard to this as well.
Hello?
Yep, Joseph, we hear you.
I had made two comments. This comes from our history here in Ohio of combating the so-called living will, which was a tool that was being used by those in favor of euthanasia. And unfortunately, a form of that has been legislated here in Ohio. So this is a battle that goes back 20 or 30 years. I detected, maybe I had to tune in a little late, but some people seem to feel that on the issue euthanasia or assisted suicide, seem to feel that we were in better shape than we were on the issue of abortion. And I'm not sure that's true. In abortion, as the baby develops in the womb, most people become a little less likely to be in favor of aborting the baby. And it is acknowledged that this is a human life, though new. With euthanasia or assisted suicide, what I'm fearful is that if that people are not opposed to the assisted suicide, it's just a question of when. So that as somebody gets older, myself included, I don't know if the Reverend's in this case, but we become less and less able to do things. We become more and more unsure of ourselves, less and less able to deal with adequate kinds of thinking. And so at some point, people begin to feel, well, you know, hasn't he been around or hasn't she been around long enough? And I fear that as time goes on, we're going to find a lot of people, especially as people age and grow older, and as they grow older, usually they decline, that are going to say, well, at some point, you know, give them the pill, gently, sweet pill, but give it to them. Oh, that's one. The other is people were using the term or the thinking that if you had a good intention, that somehow covered over whatever may really be going on. And I as a lawyer, I find that disconcerting. It's not just good intentions. And I, in my little quote there, said something about, isn't there a saying about the way to the bad place is paved with good intentions? I think there are standards, like using morphine and giving that to a patient. I do think there is some sort of decision to be made that when you give the morphine, that you're actually giving the amount that's meant to take care of the pain. And I don't think that that's equivalent to the amount that you would give them in order for it to be lethal.
Well, let's let them give an answer here, Joe.
Thanks.
So in general, I would agree with what you said. You know, intent is not something that covers over everything else. However, in the circumstance that was described by Mrs. Johnson, sorry, I forgot your first name. You know, in instances like that, where you really, it is not known if, or there is no dividing line between the level of morphine that's given for comfort purposes versus hastening death purposes. In those very limited circumstances, I believe intent can in fact be a legitimate way to discuss this.
Very good. Thank you.
Well, just to follow up on that, it seems that you have to know something about the amount of morphine that you're using and what it can cause in the person that you're giving it to. So you seem to be describing a limited number of cases where the amount of morphine is pretty close for quieting the pain, pretty close to the amount that might also be lethal. Am I correct in what you're saying, or?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
And Joe, this is another reason why I think it's very important that you get the pastor involved in this as well, so that the pastor can speak about the scriptural content of caring for that individual. And sometimes that caring, we could make mistakes, and there are going to be instances where we over medicate. But it's not the intention to over medicate. The intention is still to provide care and support for that person who is suffering. And in those cases where somebody may realize that maybe I've made a mistake or we have made a mistake, then the forgiveness of God needs to be proclaimed as well. The word that you were doing this for the least of these, my brothers, and that you can hear that forgiveness in those cases, so that folks do not think that they have sinned against their brother or neighbor in the care that they have provided.
This may be a bad joke, but there's always legal cases for I think somebody's death and wrongful death actions. I guess what I'm really saying is that there are some limits, and you have to be careful with just simply saying good intentions.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I do believe that you need to keep asking questions of the medical staff, and if they're increasing the dosage of morphine, but the person is not suffering and not feeling pain, that would be a question I would ask. Why?
Yes.
Why are you doing that? And they should have a reason. And if they know that you're concerned, hopefully they'll give that some serious thought.
And these are especially good questions to keep in mind. And I think Pastor Wheatley's presentation or his input has to deal with picking those who will come in hospice care, especially hospice care settings, for this very same reason. Yes. Good. And Roni, I'll give you the last comment. You had made a comment about medical competence. Do you want to talk about that real quickly?
Yeah, just very quickly, you talked about medical competence as being, right now the standard is, what's on the physician's heart as opposed to competence in carrying out the assisted suicide. But very sadly, I read recently that people are actually doing studies to try to ascertain best practices, which medicines work best, et cetera, what regimens work best, and actually carrying out an assisted suicide. So we may be seeing down the road some type of certification coming out in assisted suicidology or something like that.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Sadly, I think you are right.
Yeah. I mean, they are changing the medication. They have changed it periodically since this all started. And because they've taken a lot of criticism, of course, over what they've used. And so, but they all kill, whatever they're using. They're all, again, back to the intent. The intent is to kill.
Well, thank you very much, both Pastor Hinz and Virginia, for your excellent presentation tonight. I will take any emails from folks who would like to be in touch with you, and can pass that on so that we can get that information to them. And I'll look forward to that information coming from you that I can share with them as well. Thank you all for your participation this night in our For Life Live. We'll look forward to seeing you again on October 20th, when we have Dolores Desimone, who is a member of our St. Charles County Lutherans for Life chapter. And she will be helping us lead in a panel discussion on adoption and fostering to adoption. And we should also have some of her adopted children and potentially some of the birth mothers from their adoptions who will all be participating in this panel. So we'll look forward to seeing you Tuesday, October 20th at 7 p.m. That'll still be Central Daylight Time.
Pastor Duncan, before everyone leaves,
yes,
I just want to mention that we have 2 conferences coming up in the next
Go ahead.
couple of months. October 24th will be in the Phoenix, Arizona area at Life in Christ in Peoria, Arizona. And November 14th, we'll be in the Orlando area, actually in Orlando at Prince of Peace. And if you cannot go, we'd love to have you there. But if you cannot, we will be live streaming both of these events. And the topic will be From Invisible to Indispensable, and great speakers The two conferences we've already had, we recorded them, and those you can find on our website right now if you want to go back and see what's already been done. So thank you.
Excellent. And the live streaming links, information is going to be available on our website on the conference page, correct?
Right next to the church, about 15 minutes before each event, we'll put the live streaming information out there and you can get on. So go to the conference tab, go down to the church that you want to listen to on that particular day, and it'll be right there.
Excellent. Well, thank you all very much for participating. I'll look forward to talking to you more. God's blessings and have a good evening.
Thank you.